And joining us to moderate this discussion is Ms. Sina Habous, Sustainability Advisor to the Chairman at the Egyptian Exchange. And joining us in this panel, we have Mazen Al-Wadhifi, Chief Executive Officer at Amman Stock Exchange, Mervyn Tang, Head of Sustainability Strategy, APAC at Schroders, who will be joining us virtually, Hanifa Yamur, SVP and Head of Environmental Social Governance at Sahar International, and Elaine Slierink, Head of UK and Ireland and Middle East at Principles for Responsible Investment. Please, let's give them a warm welcome for the second panel discussion today.
Markets across the globe. Toward this end, there is an urgency for businesses, regulators, different stakeholders in the economy to address the looming threat of climate change. The Paris Agreement in 2015 has set the stage for countries to come to consensus with regards of the importance of addressing emissions as on a country level, on a regulatory level, and also on a market and business level, to reflect the urgency and the importance of addressing climate change. Part of, maybe a pivotal part of the Paris Agreement is net zero, achieving the net zero concept. Net zero is about offsetting emissions, counterbalancing these amounts of emissions by practicing sustainability practices, undertaking tools such as carbon market trading and technologies of capture that captures emissions are part of these kind of interactive agenda. Towards this end, allow me to begin perhaps on an international level on the importance of seeing what international institutions and programs are working on to engage the private sector and different stakeholders towards an accelerated path of net zero. We start with Mrs. Elaine. Let us discuss perhaps the efforts that is taking place by international organizations and programs like the Principles of Responsible Investments, especially in the MENA region. Perhaps there is specific peculiarities when it comes to challenges of the private sector in the region. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you, Sina, and pleasure to be here today. So I work for the PRI, the Principles for Responsible Investment. We are a UN-supported investor network. So if we're thinking about the private sector, we only work with investors globally. And great that Mervyn's joined us from Schroders, because Schroders is one of our investor signatories. So great to see you. So essentially, we work with three types of investors: asset owners, so that can include central banks, sovereign wealth funds, pension funds, investors, multi-asset managers, Schroders being one, but all the way through to smaller, maybe niche investors, also in all institutional, as well as service providers. Since our launch in 2006, we've now grown to 3,600 signatories, so investors who've signed up to the principles globally. That includes 35 in the MENA region. So perhaps not the biggest region yet, but we're really seeing the momentum, we're seeing the acceleration. Of those 35, about 26 have joined since 2020. So we're really seeing that growth over the past 3 years. I have my own views on why that is, but I'm sure others in the room, are much more knowledgeable on that also than I am. But essentially, we're really demonstrating this commitment to the region through, well, first of all, I myself relocated to the region 6 months ago. We recognize the importance of working with investors here, particularly as we've had both COP27 and now forthcoming COP28 being hosted in the region. And as to your question in terms of our efforts, what are we trying to do? Because we are an independent UN-supported organization, we really can offer this global framework for investors when they're thinking not just about net zero and climate, but also social considerations, governance considerations. How do I, as an investor, whether I'm an asset owner or an investment manager, incorporate ESG factors into my investment decisions? So yes, we have that global lens. We're a global organization, but at the same time, we're increasingly focusing on thinking about on each regional, on every market basis, what are the specific opportunities and challenges. I'm pleased to hear so far this morning, we've also heard opportunities mentioned a lot, because the transition isn't just about risks, it's also about opportunities. Obviously, the renewable sectors is a massive opportunity here, but it might also mean thinking or working with investors here about water security, food security. So those are issues we're looking at and helping investors with. So all in all, we have that global lens, hoping to really see more investors join us in the region. We have one in Oman so far signed up. I hope that we'll have a few others join us over maybe in the run up to COP28 itself. And look forward to working with investors as we can.
Do you have anything in particular planned for the region, kind of support? Because again, as I've said, there's a certain speculative suspicion towards net zero. Companies are really not sure if they're able to meet the challenge, or they are afraid of investing, they don't understand the business case. And I see this more so apparent in the Middle East. So this makes your job a little bit more challenging, I say.
Yeah, sure. I think, well, first of all, I mean, net zero was described earlier as trendy, but I would argue it's not trendy. It's a critical issue. It's a must that we should all be working on, whether it's corporate, investor, central bank, whatever again, I'm just speaking from the investor perspective, whatever that might be. In terms of what we are doing is we're really trying to work with investors to think about the long term. So both from an opportunities and a challenges perspective when it comes to thinking about net zero. I understand and appreciate, there may be hesitancy or concerns, how do I make those or take those first steps? So just quickly, maybe I'll, well, in terms of what we're doing, we'll be running a lot of workshops and activities in the run up to COP28. We're really pleased that Arab Federation of Capital Markets is a network supporter of the PRI. So I think I'll be doing a webinar specifically on net zero in the summertime. We'll probably do a workshop October, November, maybe a few just before COP. But two other things I wanted to flag is, through the PRI, it really is this network of investors globally. So you can learn from other investors.
Knowledge sharing.
Knowledge sharing. We're not on this journey alone. For this to work, it has to be collective action. So that could be learning and working with investors in the region, maybe those who are the same size as you, maybe they're VC, maybe they're PE, or you're a hedge fund, or it could be learning from investors globally. So for example, just before COP26, we'll probably look to do similar things again this time. We did some webinars specifically for smaller asset owners, smaller investment managers. They're still available online. How do I start on my net zero journey? I'm a smaller asset owner. Maybe I'm very resource limited. Where do I begin? So that's one of the sort of types of things we can offer. And then the second thing I'll just mention quickly, and I can share information with if people are interested, something called the Investor Climate Action Plans, which is essentially a ladder which investors can use when they think about setting their net zero journey or wherever they are on their climate journey. It really is a ladder of thinking about where am I and what then for me is the next step, either from an investment perspective, a stewardship perspective, a disclosure perspective. So it breaks down the climate journey into, let's say, more bite-sized pieces. Yeah. So you, depending on where you are as an investor on your journey, can take the next step that's right for you.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Maybe we can move on next to maybe highlight an investor's perspective. Mr. Tang, are you with us? Can you hear us clearly?
Yes, I am.
From an investor's perspective, how important it is to consider climate change policies, transition strategies, decarbonization targets for companies or projects that you invest in. How important is it? Can you give us a little bit of insights on this?
Absolutely. I think I understand the skepticism for many corporates in the region on why are we asking you for net zero targets? What are you looking for us to do? And I think the key is really thinking about just the economics of all of this. So if we're thinking about how many governments have set net zero policies. They've committed to reaching net zero. What this means for companies is that we're going to see policy changes. We've already seen some of that already. We've seen carbon prices schemes, the EU an example. We've seen that in China. We've seen cross-border equivalents of that, so the EU cross-border adjustment schemes, carbon taxes in many parts of the world. And what that means is that the pricing and economics of the use of fossil fuels and having higher carbon emissions is going to change. And for companies, a whole thing about setting net zero plans is to try and manage that change. How do we think about our strategy to be able to do so? What kind of capital expenditure do I need to go from a more carbon emitting process to a lower carbon emitting process? Do I start changing the way that I provide goods and services, or change my business mix altogether? And so it's not just a question of I'm going to make a commitment for 2050 and I can forget about it. It's what is my plan to get there? How do I get my board, my senior management involved to set out a very detailed plan on what that means? What is that? How is that plan going to evolve based on changing economic circumstances? Because as we've seen with COVID, the world can change very quickly, and the speed that you do things, how you decarbonize, is going to vary over time. And so I think really the core for companies is to not think about this as a trend, as Aline said earlier, but really core to what their strategic decision-making is. And I think the second set of issues that's important for corporates is the way that our asset owner clients, so we are an asset manager, we serve pension funds, sovereign wealth funds, insurers, they're also thinking about carbon in their portfolios that is affecting how they allocate. So it's not just about risk return, they're considering how they drive decarbonization in the future. And so when they're thinking about that, they're looking at the profile of the companies, they're looking at how emissions are evolving, how that compares to peers, and using that in their capital allocation decision. And so this adds another layer of financing considerations for the corporate treasurers that we have, the CEOs thinking about what their capital structure looks like. That is also going to be affected by carbon. So there is a very core economic consideration for many of the companies on the exchanges.
Thank you. Then there is an obvious change in the market and global market trends. It's important for investments to consider and investors to consider climate change policies within companies. So companies need to understand the importance of mainstreaming climate policies and adhering to net zero goals as a business imperative. And this is a very important one. Another question that I want to ask you, Mr. Tang, is what are the examples? Can you provide us a successful examples, perhaps in the MENA region, in the Middle East, in the Arabic world, that we can share with our audience?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the best way, I think, to think about this is, I'll start off as an asset manager, what we're doing for our clients. And so for our clients, we are picking, we're creating new investment products that they're interested in because they want to add the climate and decarbonization theme to their considerations. And this can be a whole bunch of different types of financial product. It could be a broad global equity market, say, investment with carbon being an additional metric that they control for. So a low carbon global portfolio. It could be much more specific when it comes to a thematic concept. So it could be regional leaders that are decarbonizing faster than their peers. So I think one of the kind of key things that we get asked a lot in emerging markets in particular is, if you compare us against developed markets, it's going to be different trajectories. And so one way of adjusting this is to think about regional sector pathways, adjusting for that to think about a different kind of low carbon products. Then another thing Aline mentioned is not just about risks and how fast you're decarbonizing, but the opportunities. So how do you think about climate solutions? How do you see companies contributing to system-wide decarbonization? That could be wind turbines, that could be water efficiency technologies, that could be natural capital, so investing in forests directly to be able to try and take advantage of their ability to sequester carbon. So there's a lot of both public and private assets you can invest in to take part in this. And so I think when it comes to the region, there's a few things we can think about at the investor level. We already see kind of looking at institutional investors. There's more conversations of how do we get that money into the right place? How do we get money into the right opportunities? How do we think about the overall carbon profile of our portfolios? At the individual company level, I think we're seeing a lot of appetite. And I think if we think about a lot of the strategy in the Middle East, there's a view that, or an understanding there's a concentration when it comes to fossil fuel exposure. And if the world is changing, there needs to be a diversification in economies and business models. And I think it's delightful to actually see the investment in renewable technology, the investment in desalination and water technologies. I think all of this is going to lead to a kind of a more sustainable low carbon economy. And I would love to see kind of the innovations in the Middle East come through to the globally, just because of the amount of capital that we have in the region.
Yes, I agree. I totally agree with you. And I have to say that in COP26 and even COP27, hopefully in COP28, countries in the Middle East and Gulf area especially have announced pledges by 2030, 2050, correct me if I'm wrong, 2060. And I think this, in addition to individual country pledges under the Paris Agreement, all these are factors and forces that will align investors and businesses to accept or to address and adopt climate mainstreaming policies and net zero targets. Speaking of government, we'll move on to Mr. Mazen Wathaifi, if I pronounce your name correctly, that of course the Chief Executive Officer of the Amman Stock Exchange, to give us his insights and efforts of the stock exchange with regards to the net zero or engaging listed companies towards the net zero.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Thank you, Sina. I would like first just allow me to express my sincere thanks for Muscat Stock Exchange and the Federation of Arab Capital Markets for holding this event and inviting me and having me in this session to talk and to address this very distinguished gathering about a very important topic and very hot topic nowadays. Actually, we all know very well how much the negative impact of the climate change on nature, health, landscape, and actually we've seen recently the wildfire, the severe floods and severe roughs and all these things actually. So in light of this, countries, governments have taken steps, actions and initiatives actually to combat this negative impact of the climate change and the high carbon emissions. A number of initiatives, including the UN Sustainability Stock Exchanges, the TCFD created by the Financial Stability Board. Now the IOSCO is cooperating with the IFRS, the International Financial Reporting Standards Board, with regard to issuing new sustainability and climate change reporting standards, which will become actually public at the beginning of January 2024, actually. That was released by the IOSCO recently. The impact, the financial impact of the climate change and the high carbon emissions actually impacted the financial sector. It has financial impact, and this has led investors, policymakers, investment managers to request information related to climate change and to integrate this information into pricing mechanism and decision making. And the stock exchanges has significant and key role in transforming and implementing and also helping investors and also transforming the infrastructure into and mainstreaming the sustainable finance through changing listing requirements, through issuing, for example, guidance for investors and for corporate governance, for corporations, helping issuers and educating and making educational campaign and awareness campaigns for issuers, how to issue, what kind of information should be disclosed to the public, to investors, to investment managers. As I said, the pricing mechanism should contain the climate change, the opportunities, the risk that that climate change could impact the company, the situation, the financial situation of listed companies. Also, stock exchanges could also regulate and issue sustainable instruments like sustainable bonds, low carbon bonds, and also financial services. You could have what they call sustainable mortgages or low carbon mortgages. So stock exchanges has key role in this and could do a lot of things actually to help combat the climate change through requesting listed companies to issue information and disclose information related to financial, let's say, financial related information. We've noticed that the Financial Stability Board established the TCFD, the Task Force on Climate Change Related Financial Disclosure. We've seen also the UNSSE issued a number of publications actually with regard as an action plan, as a guidance for stock exchanges and for issuers, how to issue and how to disclose financial related information related to climate change. So as I said, IOSCO, which is the International Organization of Securities Commissions, which is a grouping organization that issues principles, standards for the different activities in the market, in the financial market, has cooperated with the International Financial Reporting Board in order to and also I have to mention that the International Financial Board established also the International Sustainable Standards Board. And as I said, in January, they will issue in public their standards with regard to the climate change reporting and sustainable reporting.
Excellent. I just want to ask you an additional question. There's always this discussion about the threat of greenwashing.
Yes.
Sometimes we're afraid that companies would just disclose and activities on the ground or actual effect on the ground is not there. It's a little bit early for the Middle East, of course, because we're just beginning, but I think it's important for regulators to take this into perspective. I think it's also important, and please do comment on it's important to engage companies as because I think stock exchanges are ideal platforms to educate them. Well, knowledge sharing is very important, and how can they activate these kinds of policies in actual operations on day-to-day basis?
Exactly. Well, actually, education and awareness campaigns should be taken by stock exchanges, by the regulators. Actually, regulators have very important role in educating and also following up the compliance of companies and issuers with the requirements of sustainability requirements and disclosure requirements. So in order to avoid any misleading information, regulators have very important role to follow up the compliance of these issuers, to educate them, Also, education is very important. Actually, we had this experience at the Amman Stock Exchange. We have witnessed resistance by issuers actually to comply with corporate governance, for example, for more than maybe 5-6 years to comply with the requirements of corporate governance. But with the education and also with the you have to penalize sometime. You have to use your power actually to oblige companies to comply with the requirements. So with the let's say with these policies, especially education, to educate them the benefits of corporate governance and now the benefits of complying with the requirements to disclose financial related information related to climate change. This will enhance the visibility of the company. This will enhance the confidence of investors, will enhance especially the international investors, especially with the influx actually of principles and recommendations by international institutions, including IOSCO, the FSB, the TCFD, and the UN, SSE, etc., etc. So I think this is very important for regulators and for the operators in the market.
Thank you, Mr. Mazen. Thank you so much. Last but not least, Ms. Hanife, can you share with us the banking perspective of Sohar International Bank?
Yep, thank you, and thank you for the opportunity to speak today. I think banks, just like investors, play a very key role in helping governments and economies move to a net zero position. If you think about a bank, you think of its customer base, it's deep and it's wide. We have retail customers, SMEs, wholesale banking, large corporates, and in many ways, it's our actually responsibility to help enable many of the policies at the government level, which is obviously within the Sultanate of Oman, the net zero position by 2050. So it's our role to help manage that through the economy, because any of these mandates made by at the government level will all need to be cascaded through the economy in some way, shape or form. So it just means, in a very basic sense, really good risk management for starters. And I think in terms of demystifying some of the net zero, as we talked about earlier, and some of the, I guess, the skepticism that sort of sits around ESG, sustainability, net zero, carbon credits, all the different terms and elements that make up, I think, a really simple way of looking at all of this is just a risk and opportunity lens, and that's how the bank is looking at it. And I think it's in two ways. So from a risk perspective, we need to make sure that any gateways of policies coming on board, that we are managing our portfolios of assets, that we are helping our customers with any of those impacts. One of the key things that's often spoken a lot about very early on in the banking sector is the likelihood of stranded assets. You know, a brownfield building today may actually become obsolete if the government tomorrow asks for all new buildings to be 6-star rated with all these elements of energy efficiency. So what happens to our valuation of our portfolio? So there's the risk side that we need to look at. We have assets on the coastline of Oman, and those Omanis in the room will understand that this like cyclomatic activity within Oman happens, but it's actually happening more frequently. And so what do we do to make sure that we are thinking about the risks around our assets that are potentially positioned on the coastline of Oman? The flip side, the risk that we have is we might want actually to raise debt, or we want to work with investors to raise capital. And the questions we get asked are about ESG. So we need to demonstrate our performance on ESG and make sure that we embed it in everything we do. So my appointment, even though it's still quite new, I tick over 1 year in July this year, Sohar International was one of the first banks to appoint a head of ESG. And one of the key elements that I'm working on is formalizing a lot of the work that we are doing into a formal ESG framework that will govern and essentially be our guide for embedding ESG throughout the organization. That doesn't stop us though from looking at the opportunity side, which is the side I'm most excited about. And I'm particularly excited in Oman because I think naturally Oman has this innate culture that really does gel very well with the elements, the principles of sustainability. You're an inclusive society, you look at equity. These are elements that are very important to sustainability. And we can see also the government has released, and my boss, the CEO, in the previous presentation showed some really lovely data on where the Sultanate is trying to push and diversify its economy. And so we are looking at these opportunities in a financing perspective, looking at it from an investment banking perspective, and really working with potential clients coming in to Oman, but also our Omani customers. The other thing that is really important for us is the capacity, and I did like Schroeder's comment, Mervin's comment about having a different focus for emerging markets, because a TCFD is fantastic, but to apply a TCFD in Oman is challenging. And I actually think it's a little unfair on our customer base. So we need to be pragmatic, and we as a bank need to build a lot of capacity across our customer portfolio. And so sustainable financing for us in a small bank, in a banking scenario in Oman may not look like necessarily a green bond, but it may actually come in the form of lots of advisory. So I've been asked a lot actually, and I'm very excited about this opportunity to work with our customer base to help them on their ESG journey and to educate, make them aware where if it means developing plans for them, that then helps them, the bank help them on their journey to decarbonize or deal with a lot of the transition, then that's something that we'll do. So I think our sustainable financing model might be slightly different to a normal sort of bank in a developed country, which may actually look at, we'll also do some of the transactions like sustainability linked loans, etc. But I think it'll also be in a lot of the advisory space. I firmly believe if you look across our portfolio of customers, there is opportunity to optimize, and there's even just some initial tweaks that we can make to really draw out the sustainability value across our portfolio.
I have to point or highlight something you've said that's very important, is assessing, measuring climate risk, the financial repercussion of climate risk. In my own encounters, it's the most challenging issue that's facing private sector in our region, is how to assess and measure climate risk and how to integrate it within the financial portfolio of a companies. In a quick nutshell, 2 words, what is the main challenges that we're facing in the region when it comes to climate change and net zero? Let's start with Eileen.
I would say probably data. So data from companies. I think there's a real role for investors to engage with companies, engage with stock exchanges to make sure that the right data is available when it comes to investing for net zero, or if you're not working towards net zero yet, whatever that next step or first step is on your climate journey.
Thank you. Mazen?
I would say it's a much harder task than I think sometimes people think about. And I think a lot of people want to dilute it into, oh, this is my carbon footprint of my portfolio. It's lower than some benchmark or some regional benchmark, and that's it. And actually, as asset managers, what we realize is not like that. You could have higher carbon companies, which are, let's say, very strong businesses with the ability to pass through to customers, where the cash flow impact is not going to be as obvious versus a, let's say, a sector which is much more competitive like steel, where it's much more difficult to pass cost to your customers. There's going to be different types of scenarios depending on what region you operate in. Carbon prices could vary, and so it's a bit of analysis that's going to take a significant amount of work to look at. And so for those who hope things would dilute into a simple number with a few metrics, I don't think that's climate risk, unfortunately.
That's such a good point. I know
yes.
Mazen wants to talk, but I'm so glad you've said that, because you know, we could calculate our financed emissions and the greenhouse gas emissions of our portfolio, but the question would be to a detailed number, a set of numbers. But what does that, I mean, we'd probably be generating a lot of GHG emissions calculating that number in the first place. I think also the flip side is those that, and maybe the banking sector has been a little bit, has also suffered a little bit from this, that they've picked up these frameworks that exist and have run with them, but not actually told the story of what the risk and opportunity profile of the portfolio is, because I can give you a heat map of our risks. But I think it's more important to show you what we're doing with those areas of concern and how we're going to move those areas. So I think that story, without actually having the detail, I think can also be very helpful. So data is a huge issue. And again, we have to work with our customers to build capacity. I mean, it's ridiculous to ask some of them to do detailed carbon footprints when they still are just trying to grapple some of the ESG concepts. So I think there's a bit of a hybrid approach for us while the market continues to grow locally and regionally. But I really think that's a very good point that Mervyn makes.
Mazen?
Yes. Well, actually, the main challenge for the stock exchange in particular is the lack of awareness with regard to the benefits of the disclosure and of financial climate change related disclosure, and this actually led us as a stock exchange to start gradually with the ASE 20, the biggest companies in the market, to start implementing and requiring as mandatory actually requirement to issue their sustainability reports starting this year. Actually, this year they have started providing the stock exchange with their 2022 sustainability reports. And we've started also in cooperation with international actually institutions like the UNDP, the UN Global Compact, with the IFC. We've signed an agreement with the International Finance Corporation, especially to educate and to hold seminars and educational campaign with to familiarize the companies with the climate change reporting. And actually the Amman Stock Exchange was the first in the region and the fifth worldwide actually to implement this initiative. So I think we have to start gradually, as I'm talking about a market like our market, small size, and with the biggest companies. These big companies, the ASE 20, the companies that are listed in the index of the ASE 20, we've started with them. We have held a number of educational campaigns, seminars, training, also workshops to familiarize them with the requirement of the sustainability reporting. And now we have started to educate them on the benefits and also the requirements, and also the international standards now issued by the international institutions which we've had just mentioned, and that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mazen. I know we're drawing to a close, but however, I would like to open the floor for questions. Any questions to our esteemed panelists, please? Any questions? That's it. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much.